Greetings and salutations, ladies, menfolk, and non-binary viewers. Welcome to another episode of Game Break, an ongoing series where me and my crew take a break from our creative endeavors and play some video games. I am Charles, coming to you today with another episode of World and Economica. Now, last time round, Yoshi and Risa and what was the person who doesn't like us? Like Hanako? Haruka? Something with an H. Mainly we were still in the church. Not sure when we're gonna leave the church, or what we're gonna do once we leave the church. Hopefully we leave the church. That would be nice. But let's find out. Do we actually get to leave the church or not? Let's get the mouse out of the way. The moon had low gravity, so it was common to utilize a spring when doing any weight training. A rod and coil made for that purpose had been sold online and was a rather popular product. However, it was questionable how many who bought it actually used it. After all, the fitness company who made a fortune selling sets of rods and coils had managed to sell over 3 million sets, including similar items. But no matter how you looked at it, any single set would have been more than sufficient. How did we get onto exercise stuff? I don't remember that. In fact, the population on the moon was about 700,000 people, although tourists would send that number up to 1 million. There were many people out there who would buy it and not use it, knowing that a new model was on the way. Even if the equipment was used properly, there was the matter of using it for more difficult applications, and then the user manual would neglect to note this. The words of my stubborn, old-fashioned father would repeat in my head while I did weight training. With weights on my arms, shoulders, back, and abs, I would do balance training involving headstands and light somersaults, which would go on for no more than 20 minutes. Since I wasn't aiming to be an athlete, any training beyond that wasn't really necessary. If nothing else, the people who came from the town my folks were from, the kind who could never tell a lie, would all say in unison to take care of the body, for it will always be useful. With the height of net prosperity and the lower gravity and the near unlimited supply of electrical power on the moon, physical labor was categorized as being the lowest of the low in terms of recognition. There weren't any people who had made it big with physical labor. At best, there was always the consideration of those who worked in show business. But even then, the ones who got paid the big money weren't the actors who toiled away in their craft, but the people who managed them. However, after leaving home and taking the time to observe things outside of the boundaries of the rules of society, I had come to understand that there was a lot of truth in those words. Are we going to get any background beyond just the black screen at some point? I mean, I know this was a transition point because the screen went black and all, but come on, give us something. Anything? No? All right. Even after evading the police sent to bring me back home, I realized that there was some useful advice to be had, as expected of those seasoned veterans who escaped from the jaws of guerrilla fighters, secret police, and military juntas. I wiped the sweat off with a towel and put on my clothes. The same clothes Risa and Hagana were complaining about before. After 2 washes, I probably finally got rid of the smell, but I had a feeling that I had washed away something like an important mark of readiness that had been stained into the clothing in the last 3 months. The one thing I had become aware of after leaving home was that people were relaxed by the smell of detergent. The word cleanliness had a rather weak image. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if there's a non-mouse way of moving the words. There's not. Then again, this wasn't half bad. Hey, transition! Back to the room, and the morning music, yay! I stretched my back and tossed my backpack over my shoulder. Since today was Sunday and the trading houses were closed, it was an important day for me as I could go out and just walk around. It also appeared that the culprit from the theft was arrested, so the odds of being mistakenly arrested and taken home had diminished. It was just as Lisa suspected. The culprit was a young man who also had run away from home. Leaving home without any means, turning to a life of crime and causing trouble for others, this guy was clearly the typical idiot. Alright, I'll give you that one. I'll agree with you on that one. It's possible that he wasn't from Earth, but was born and raised on the moon. As someone born and raised on the moon myself, I could sympathize. But for people from Earth, it seemed that the lower gravity was to blame for making many people lightheaded. Aside from issues of pride, many could live on the collected scraps left over from the geniuses and prodigies of Newton City who had amassed great fortunes. Some would say that it was the fault of this sense of security, perhaps. Compared to the people who came to the moon from Earth, within the groups of tourists were also those who came here with some great sense of purpose. They came to the moon to do something or another. It could be that they came to find a tranquil life they couldn't find back on Earth. Likewise, they might have come to find a thrilling life that couldn't be found back on Earth. After all, I understood that one must step forward when one had a purpose at hand. Anyway, the cost to take the orbital elevator by any legal means was staggering, and there were many hurdles to clear if you were to look for any discounts or exemptions. In any case, there were many Earth dogs who knew where they came from, where they were, and what they should be doing. Literally, there was Earth on the bottom of their shoes. That was why I hated these Earth dogs. Douche. Ooh, new scene. I tied my shoes and left through the hallway. The place was eerily quiet. Lisa headed out to the restaurant after eating breakfast. I knew that Hagana was still here, but outside of going to the toilet, she would seclude herself in her room, and you couldn't even hear a peep coming out of there. I had no idea what she was doing in there, but I got eerie vibes. That was why I had everything I owned in my backpack. I wouldn't be surprised if Hagana took a hammer to my PC and destroyed it while I was out. I did not continue walking down the corridor towards the living room. Instead, I went up the stairs to the second floor. The church was in a low-income area. Much like everything else around, it was built upon parts of a crater that had been partially zoned, so navigating the sector was a bit complex. The entrance to the sector was along a relatively wide street, but the second and third floor portions seemed to cling to the cliffs as they stretched upward. According to Lisa, these places weren't very well off financially. The faded parts of buildings here and there around the church were obvious, but they appeared neither small nor inexpensive. Ascending the narrow steps took you to two rooms that looked out on a small yard from which you could see the Sky Park. As they were both on a slant, the rooms themselves were small. One of them was apparently Lisa's. There was a white-painted chair and table in the small garden. And if you were to ascend the stairs another level, they became more like a ladder. What functioned as a handrail was actually what Lisa used to carry a basket of laundry. There was a room, or rather, a storage shed on the third floor, and past that you could reach a site near the roof. The door was wooden, but there was a note on it with a handwritten note from Lisa that said to always lock the door when leaving. That's awkwardly written. I was sure some people had been locked out many times. I, of course, would be returning through the front entrance, and with that, I headed out. Yay, outside world! The moon was in the middle of the 2-week-long afternoon, and the light that permeated the dome over this lunar city during this time felt rather good. Today, I could see Earth from the usual place. This yard had something of an extravagant feel to it, with a large tree growing very close to a cliff behind it. I wondered if the placement of the table and chair were so Risa and Hagana could enjoy the shade of the tree. The cliffs all around gave the place a feeling of isolation. It was a nice place. Right now, there was only the noise of the laundry machine, and it was clear what belonged to whom. Looking over the jumble of streets of the 6th outer section, you could see someone on the roof casually reading something on a computer terminal, and someone repairing a roof. You could see bakeries and a dry cleaner, buildings spewing out water vapor from misshapen chimneys, and homes under construction. However, my objective wasn't to survey the area. It would be nice to scale the cliff in the back and roam around the plateau above, but I'd probably end up on someone's property and they call the cops on me. I moved nimbly between the houses seen from the park, and having found the continuation of the path towards the top of the plateau, I broke into a run as I left the park. What was before me was what I had seen from the park. Before me were the buildings of Newton City that pointed in the direction of Earth. I left the 6th outer section's business district and got on board the rather boringly named Lunar Development Train. It literally was a train from the time the lunar surface was being developed. And at the station's starting point and terminus, there was a diorama of an individual in a spacesuit doing work in the lunar desert. No matter how much you could visit it virtually on the net, tourists still flocked to the diorama as if it showed some deference of gratitude as they took pictures of it. Once, someone had the bright idea of making an incision in it to accommodate a box, so tourists would mistake it for a donation box. Supposedly, it was filled to the brim with coins. However, what that guy failed to realize was that after only a few hours, the foolish tourists would have filled the box with donations. Then they would complain to the station attendant that they couldn't put any more in. Thus the plan was foiled. After that, capitalizing on the idiot's bright idea, the station attendants installed a large unmarked box to collect small change from tourists. This was a classic example of a moment of carelessness toppling even a good get-rich scheme. There wasn't a lot of living space on the moon, so the lunar development train almost seemed to apologize as it shrank down and sped through the city. The train passed alongside the chaotic mishmash of buildings, and for a brief moment it was possible to look out the window to see into the lives of the people out inside. The tourists took great amusement seeing their own country's culturally styled buildings and lifestyles. Of course, there were no cultural aspects I particularly saw that amused me at all. The moon was made of a hodgepodge of immigrants. On top of that, it was a place where people who couldn't shake off Earth's gravity gathered, so the coloring was way too pale. That was why one could say that the line performed very well. Even those from my hometown had hoped to accomplish something would resolutely look coldly at all this. This was the moon, after all, not Earth. As we passed each station, the townscape changed accordingly. From a chaotic atmosphere to orderly streets... From a chaotic atmosphere to orderly streets, the stateless nature of the place became more evident. Buildings, both straight and with elegant curves that did not exist in the natural world, multiplied as perfectly trimmed trees grew in number. We had entered the White Belt. There were many advertisements within the train directed at the typical salaryman, with information on insurance for families. Again, the ground gradually lowered and the train slowly separated from it. The beautiful cityscape unfolded below, and soon we were traveling at a height equal to that of the 10-story building. No matter how beautiful a building was, there would still be provisions for the many complexities in life, as one would expect. Everywhere you looked, the green of parks could be seen, and one could look down to see large canals. That doesn't look very picturesque. In contrast, far in the distance, one could see the chaotic town of Red Valley. I was impressed that they would dare come up with names like White Belt and Red Valley. As I thought about that, the train suddenly picked up a burst of speed. Along the streets below, all that could be seen were residential and commercial buildings, like a district of cold buildings. Now that we'd reached a height of 20 stories, we stopped being able to see the tops of buildings passing by. Beyond the glass windows, one could see the busy salarymen as electronic billboards started to flood the view. Before long, as if the train went right into a thick forest, we were covered in shadows, and vision was reduced greatly for a moment. The train continued to navigate through groups of nearby buildings by going around them. Then, suddenly, my vision cleared up again. This was the large plaza before the Newton City Central Station. The vastness of the gigantic atrium would amaze not only travelers from Earth, but even those raised on the moon. At 162 meters above ground, nanowires held up a massive clock and hologram screen right in midair. The train continued along the side of the large plaza and was eventually swallowed up within the terminal station. It, like Lunar City, could be considered a gathering of the highest levels of wealth and honor for mankind. That's a nice riff. Cool. I got off the train and counted the number of advertisements that came into view. There were 3 from nanotech companies, 4 from major software corporations, 2 from biotech firms, 2 from insurance companies, and 6 from banks. So, sounds about par for the course around here too. Well, maybe not the nanotech stuff. And then there were 5 from investment banks. Each and every one of them was famous for their rate of earnings and prideful of their proceeds, and they had the task of sweeping up all the proceeds from the wealth on Earth and pumping it into this lunar city. Listing the world's companies in order of market cap within the top 100 companies, 37 of them were on the moon. It's more than one would find in London or New York. The number of companies abandoning Earth and setting up their main offices here were great, and the number that wanted to strike it big was even greater. New frontiers gathered up the brightest of folk. In this era, as long as you had a talented mind and a net connection, you could come out on top. The moon was different from the Earth, where everything the eye could see had been developed owing to a long history. The old geezers wielded immense power, sitting high upon their thrones. Some random country couldn't monopolize power here, and because of the nuclear crisis, countries everywhere shied away from the bomb. Thus, the moon was literally an empty place with no external annoyances. Even placing second or third in a race to come here would still be more than enough for someone to become a key figure in the city. Although their footprints were no longer displayed, along with the others in the Sea of Tranquility Memorial Hall, without a doubt they stood on the forefront of humanity. For example, there was a bronze bust in front of the central entrance of Central City. The model of this overly serious-faced statue that seemed to look down on pedestrians was E.J. Rochberg, who people said would have simply ended up as an excellent banker had he stayed on Earth. Right now, he was the CEO of a top-class investment bank here on the moon. At merely 29, he got involved in investing in the lunar development train. In those days, he worked vigorously in lunar development, which few people regarded with much interest, as he gambled upon mankind's career and everything he had. That got the ball rolling. On Earth, stories were told about how he built the city from nothing, although many key figures would say that very few people understood what that really meant. It's just that they rode the wave well, they said. I supported those sentiments, even though everyone knew that how they all approached it was less than ideal. At any rate, even though my parents came to the moon at the same time that E.J. Rochberg did, it was evident in the difference in income levels. They worked at leveling the rock to put in soil for the growing and harvesting of crops. Was that not a job from trillions of years before? And on that note, it would have been easier to just have done that back on Earth. That was why I made sure to remind myself of this sometimes by coming all the way out to Newton City by train. Particularly, it was a place that those with little training or education would oftentimes find their big break in the city. If you left the station and headed in the opposite direction of the plaza, right before your eyes was a path on the right-hand side of the towering building of the lunar government. Among the many glassed buildings in Newton City, there were many that were built using material cut from dark rock. Because of that, they looked plain at first glance. But in my opinion, it is something that gives off an intimidating air, like something with an unequally powerful gravitational pull. That was the financial district, where banks and investment banks set up shop. Pointing to the street was a simple sign that said Schrödinger Street. Schrödinger? Really? They're going with that? Okay. And there, next to it, was the bronze statue of a small cat. The cat had a sly expression in its eyes, as it lay sprawled with one foot on a single gold plate. Engraved on the gold plate was this: "You can't know the outcome until you open the box." I thought that this was most appropriate for the financial district. Although I hadn't succumbed to any religious beliefs here on the moon, I saw nothing wrong with petting the cat for good luck. I pet the cat on its head and ran my finger along the outline of the gold plate. You can't know the outcome until you open the box. I came here for the sake of telling myself these words. There were many people who went from being mere errand runners to becoming the masters of the giant buildings that lined these streets. I literally came to recharge my spirits here. Okay. Transition. Schrödinger Street on the weekend was pretty much filled with tourists like me. There was only a few taxis running around, not to mention the total lack of black luxury cars. You could see busy-looking people in suits, but the security guards in front of the 5-meter front entrances of buildings were yawning out of boredom. There was a hot dog stand along the road. It was so famous that people ranging from hotshot bankers and traders making $1 million a month to the 6 mool an hour mailmen would all congregate and eat there. I heard that it was great being able to get your dog 10 seconds after ordering and then eat it with one hand. People who'd go to burger joints to eat a meal were considered second-rate, and people who'd go buy boxed lunches were just laughingstocks. Thus, being caught up in the flow of walking along this street, I bought a hot dog. Working on a day off? The vendor said something along those lines and placed a fat sausage in the bun. I didn't even think about replying along the lines of, "Don't treat me like a fool, I at least have a stable income." But being treated as one of the regulars here filled me with joy. To me, making money was a means and not an end. However, after thinking long and hard about it, the fastest way to get rich had to be here. When I had come to that decision, I felt a great reverence for the people at the head of the pack here. And with that, I realized that I actually did have a bit of fanboyism in me. So I thanked the guy, paid my respects to the people passing by, and walked off more fidgety than usual. The main offices of E.J. Rochberg, with top-tier investment banks like Hallard Bros and Platina Smith, not far behind, established their massive buildings here. In order to make the most efficient use of space, Newton City was divided into 3 levels. They were the underground level, the above-ground level, and the sky level. I was currently in the sky level, and the main entrances for all the buildings were here. Below this were relegated companies and rented out office space. The underground and above-ground level portions of the buildings on Schrodinger Street were filled with countless funds and consulting agencies. While walking around eating my hot dog, I would occasionally come across narrow and compact buildings with gilded signs and atriums adorned with chandeliers and paintings. These weren't places where money exchanged hands, but rather places where those with enormous sums of money obtained official legal guarantees. Top-class law firms, accounting firms, and government outlets resided here. After walking a bit more, I arrived at an intersection. In front of me was a strangely shaped edifice that reminded me of the Colosseum in Rome. The entrance was dozens of floors above the pavement, and the stairs leading up to it formed its own plaza. It was such a special place that it was allowed to use up this much space. Occupying the intersection between Schrodinger Street and Bit Street, which was made up of software and media companies, the Lunar United Stock Exchange could be called the city's source of wealth. It was a place where stocks from companies all over the world, not just from the moon, were traded, and it was the pride of the world. Combined with various future markets, trillions of mools exchanged hands every day. There were a lot of tourists and a lot of people crowding around the standard bronze statue at the entrance, taking pictures. You could say this was the pinnacle of capitalism and humanity's expansion. The entrance was wedged between giant screens displaying market information 24 hours a day. Currently airing was a discussion between the vice manager of the Lunar Central Bank and the famous CEO of Platina Smith on the relaxation of regulations. Both of them were in their mid-40s and could be considered quite young by Earth standards. On the moon, someone in their mid-40s would be considered elderly, although these two were still full of confidence and energy. I leaned against the giant steps of the stock exchange and ate the rest of my hot dog slowly. Everything here was big, vast, and solid. Being a little brat not even worth a scrap of tissue, buying a hot dog was the most that I could do here. However, I'll use the one computer in my bag to make money, and eventually become one of the major players here. That wasn't much more than the first step in achieving my dream, but attaching specific milestones to my goal made me think of how rash it was. However, there were many people who managed to pull it off in the past. Thus, there shouldn't be any reason I couldn't do it. I wouldn't be able to understand without looking with eyes wide open. The CEO of Platina Smith, who was talking on the screen, had a yearly salary of 37 million mools, being the highest amongst all the major enterprises here in Schrodinger Street. Normal people would be quite satisfied at making 2 million mools over their lifetime, so no one would disagree that this yearly salary was monstrous. However, there were also many people who made at least 1 billion mools a year working in these offices. These were hotshots whose salaries definitely had teeth to them, and they made tons of money using their expertise and behaved almost like lone wolves. These were the people I looked up to in admiration, since I had neither a real educational background nor a financial backer. My ambitions had still not been fulfilled, so I could only watch them here, But eventually, I would stand shoulder to shoulder with them as either rivals or comrades, instead of looking at them from a distance. They were unmistakably billionaires, holding on to the majority of the wealth in this world. Money. Just money. The object of my unbearable desires circulated here like a whirlpool. Transition. And maybe. I squashed the hot dog wrapper and stood up impatiently. Time to head back and look for more money-giving trees. And eventually, I would become someone who'd be acknowledged here. And then, after that... While on the train, I fixed my hold on my bag while staring at the giant panoply of Newton City's receding buildings. Oh my. What is this? That was fucking awesome. If they put that at the very beginning, I would have been a lot more excited and pumped for this. That was freaking cool. If that were an intro for like an anime or something, I would definitely check that out. That was really nicely done. And I'm intrigued about a lot of those faces that we haven't seen yet. Alright. But wait, so does that mean like the last 4 episodes were the intro to the game and we're only just now getting into it? Because if that's so, how long is this series gonna be? Oh my goodness. Well then. On that note, moving on! As expected, visiting Newton City had replenished my reserves after they had been worn down by a week of trading. Paying no heed to the temptations of consumerism found in the bustling streets, I headed straight back to the church. The scenery changed so much that it appeared as if I was no longer on the same lunar surface. Even now, I started seeing more and more buildings on the verge of collapsing. There were people draping fishing lines into the canals and people growing their own food to cut costs. There were people selling steamed buns, people resurfacing knives, and even people repairing shoes on contract. It was a place filled with bustling life, far removed from the realm of high profits. Clicking my tongue at no one in particular, I jumped past throngs of buildings while making my way back. While getting yelled at by an old fellow, I jumped off the rooftop of a 4-story building and flew into the air. I could see the Lunar Chinese restaurant off in the distance. Looking around, I could also see the dirty building-lined street that the Big Bull Cafe was on. as well as my favorite tunnel that opened out into the hill. However, it was impossible to stay in the air forever. Thus, I descended gradually, with a gravity 1/6 that of Earth's tugging at me. I absorbed my inertia by bending my knees, then flew up for one last time to cover more ground. It's not like I could do this outside of paths with few people passing by, depending on the circumstances. I could get pursued by police on grounds of dangerous behavior. However, this speeding sensation was simply unbearably awesome. That would be pretty fun to do, to be fair. It was totally suited for me, having just been rejuvenated by Newton City. Well, it's time to get cranking and look for stocks that would bring me the money. And the moment I opened the door and walked in... no voice. Who is it? No, stop! A shrill voice resounded in the air. For a second, I wondered if I had waltzed into the wrong church, but it didn't seem to be the case. I could still hear the voice. If you can't place it yet, who is it? No, stop! Stop it! It sounded like it was coming from the halls of the main building. My mind spun in circles for a few seconds, then cleared up immediately. A burglar? And the voice was Hagana? Even though she was a damn cheeky and arrogant woman, she was still a woman. What does that mean? I jumped off the back of a row of pews, flew over them, and dashed down the hall. You couldn't have just, gone down the aisleway? I heard a shriek and the sound of something getting flipped over. I opened the half-closed door that led to the living room, threw off my backpack, and made a tight fist. By now, my head was swimming in adrenaline and my body was fully primed for battle. The only thought in my head was advice I had heard from a guerrilla fighter from the Caucasus region, who had said that yelling when jumping into a situation had a negative effect. Rushing in grabbed people's attentions easily. However, if you could drop down right away, you'd disappear from their sight and approach your target swiftly. Then, once you're within range, you'd get up in one go and apply overwhelming force. If your opponent was armed with a gun, just jump off to the side. He wouldn't be able to hit you. If he wielded a blade, just go straight for him. It's not as scary as you think. It's still scary. Now, if he's unarmed, just do whatever. Who are you? I aimed at the dude who had just trashed the room and took a swing at him with my fist. I planted my feet with all my strength to increasing the friction, increasing my effective mass and thus the power of my punch. As long as your mass was low, the power of your attack would only be what Newton's third law gave you. My punch made a clean hit on my opponent, who had just turned toward me in surprise. With a nice sounding smack, the punch went through unhindered. That seemed to be enough. I got pulled along by the inertia of my punch, and by the time I stopped spinning on my other foot, my opponent spun around awkwardly and collapsed right there. He wasn't passed out, although he might have gotten a concussion. His eyes were zoned out and his hands, which were looking like they were trying to grab onto something, were trembling and stiff. Preparing myself to kick him into the air at a moment's notice, I called out to Hagana without averting my gaze one bit. You okay? In the corner of my eyes, I could sort of make out a figure clad entirely in black. It was Hagana. She was standing motionless and silent, stuck against the wall. No audible reply came back. However, she was silent not because of the usual arrogance factor, but because she was simply unable to speak. The man grabbed onto the fallen sofa with one hand and tried to prop himself back up somewhat. And I grabbed that hand and twisted it upwards. I squeezed the bony part of his wrist and twisted it upwards and outwards. His body fell over easily, and the extreme pain made the intruder's thoughts quite clear. He looked like a very sad tax guy or something. Hey, who are you? Those were my words after I rotated his arm around his back, putting me in a position that let me apply additional pressure at any time. This guy was a middle-aged man about the same height as me, and he had a grimy appearance as well as frizzy hair that was mostly thinned out. He looked like quite a crafty guy. I looked past the man at Hagana. It didn't look like he had assaulted her or anything. The only thing I could see was that the corners of her damn cheeky eyes had gotten red, and that her hands were trembling a bit. If you don't answer properly, I'll kill you. Even if you remain silent, I'll kill you. I knew many deserted lots, and I also knew ruffians who came from war-torn regions on Earth. In a place where there was a possibility of maybe just one murder a year, my threat probably sounded like a child's bluff. However, that appraisal depended on the circumstances. The man I'd subdued pretty much instantaneously let out a hoarse shriek. I twisted his arm lightly and asked him again, "What are you, a burglar? Do you know that it's okay to punish a burglar by killing him?" That would hurt, to be fair. This time his shriek was quite clear. "Wait, please wait. Don't kill me." "That'll depend on the circumstances. What's with the mess in this room? Enlighten me." I twisted his arm some more, and he let out a squeal. I knew that it managed to make Hagana cower in fear. She was surprisingly feminine and totally out of it. It's a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I'm not a burglar. No way." "So then, what are you?" I'd hardly expect some neighbor to come over for tea and get angry enough to flip over a sofa, send a table flying with a kick and rip out the carpet. The room really did look that way, like a building marked for demolition. Furthermore, I myself heard Hagana shouting for him to stop. And also her hand was trembling. "Well, but it was my fault. It's her. It's her fault." "Oh yeah? Well, aren't you the self-righteous burglar?" Like I said, I'm not a burglar. It's true. I'm a debt collector. Debt collector." Really? That's what we're going with here? "That's right. I came to collect some owed money. It's my job." Well, it does kind of look like it. I didn't think he was lying, but I decided to look over at Hagana anyway. After Hagana stared at the suffering man, she noticed my gaze and turned towards me in surprise. "Is that the case?" When asked, she paused for a second and then nodded. I clicked my tongue and let the man go. The man crawled along the floor to run away, then turned around. "What the? It's just a brat." "If you think I'm a brat, want to go for round 2? Training up my body had really been convenient for a lot of things. The debt collector shook his head violently and looked up at me through servile eyes. "So, a debt collector's one of those types, eh? They even have the right to do all this?" Well... I figured. So, what are we going to do? Huh? I said, what should we do? Should we call the cops, or are we really going to do some debt collecting? The debt collector clearly gulped. However, afterwards, he lowered his gaze. "At most, I'd be lectured at all night, in detention. Besides, if you call the cops, I will just read them this loan statement. I don't really want to, since it'd cost me some fees, but I could totally just go get the courts to foreclose on you." "Well, aren't we a spunky one?" I moved my knee up to scoot over to him, but he suddenly pulled back, so as I was unable to force him down anymore. And with that, I remembered one thing from my training. If your opponent stopped yielding, go for negotiations. Well, you're here for the interest and fees, right? Yeah. See, you understand, right?
In this world, you can't just borrow money and refuse to show even the smallest signs of paying it back. Besides, I got totally treated like trash.
The debt collector glanced over at Hagana. Following his lead, I also looked over. She was cowering against the wall like a pinned butterfly.
When the money was lent out, it was all humility and everything, you know? Well, I guess it was Lisa who was lowering her head.
Well, I can kind of see that.
Oh, you see, right? Why do I have to put up with being called a dung beetle or space trash or...
Looking at Hagana past the grumbling debt collector, I could see her looking downwards and staring at us with sullen, childish eyes.
Besides, it's not like I'm asking for the entire principal back. I know that it's impossible anyway, but this is also a business, so I'd like for the interest to be paid back at least.
And as he said that...
There's no money here for you,
Hagana yelled out. The debt collector shrugged and turned towards me.
See?
With "see," I told you, written on his face. He's probably in the right. I heaved a sigh of resignation and looked up at him. So, how much?
What?
The interest. How much is it?
Oh.
His face lit up.
Don't tell me that you're gonna...
Depends on the amount. Saying too much might result in the offer's retraction, but saying too little might end with losing money. I could see the guy tackling this question in his mind for a moment until he finally came up with an answer.
200 mools.
That's the interest? That's not terrible. Huh. I remembered how Lisa reacted when I had given her 200 mools. So this was it, huh? So that's this month's interest, or this year's interest.
This month's. Since my top blew over and I did a bunch of things, this is lower than usual. It's actually 6% annual interest on a 50,000 mool principal. Compound interest is kind of annoying, so I just had set it at 250 mools a month.
Since I had totally thought that this was some shady loan deal, I was surprised at the relatively low interest rate here. To hide my surprise, I ordered him coldly, "Show me the loan agreement."
What?
At first the debt collector was speechless, but eventually he reluctantly showed it to me. Those numbers he quoted were certainly written down there. I sighed again and stuck my hand into my pocket. Here. I had run out of 100 mool bills, so I carefully counted out 200 mools worth of bills and handed it to him. He reached out carefully, as if I would smack him the moment he laid hands on the money. After receiving the money, he hunched over the money and counted furtively.
It's good.
All right.
Well then, I'll be off.
Wait up. I swept his leg quickly with my front leg, causing him to fall over. Then I got up, walked over to him, put my knee in his face, and squatted down. You got some nerve not giving me a receipt.
Aren't you a student?
Talk about money doesn't bother me. You tell me. After I said that, the debt collector resigned himself, cut me a receipt, and returned dejectedly. I leaned against the magnificent door of this church, in which hung a crucified man, and saw the man's faint silhouette before looking back at the receipt in my hand. 200 mools of interest was probably a large amount of money in these parts. If I wanted to earn 200 mools with the job Lisa offered to refer to me, it would take 4 or 5 days' worth of income to come up with that amount. Furthermore, in that period of time, there would be food expenses and rent, along with other consumables and such that must be paid. In other words, low income meant you couldn't save up money. If you couldn't save up money, you couldn't invest. And if you couldn't invest, you'd be forced to take money by selling your time forever. A shovel could not fill a giant hole. You could only fill a giant hole by pushing a snowball down a hill until it snowballed into enormous proportions. I actually hadn't seen snow before, but I had heard advice before about investments and really liked this particular analogy involving snowballs. Simply put, that's why these 200 mools weren't just 200 mools to me. It's something that could become 10,000 mools or even 1 million mools in the future. When Lisa returns, I'd have to get my money back. At least I saw her putting 200 mools in the cupboard. I wasn't going to let her just say she didn't have it. And unfortunately, we're going to have to call the episode there, because I'm out of time for recording, but... Okay, the plot thickens. I'm intrigued. I'm beginning to see that Hal, or Yoshi as I want to call him, has a part to play in this church, it looks like. Something's going to go down and helping out, I think. And that little intro, I want to call it, that they gave us all of a sudden was really cool. Really nicely done for whatever team put that together. I was impressed. So, thanks for joining me. Come back next time, and we'll see just what we're going to do from here. How are we going to get our money back and help this church out? Until then, get back to being creative already. Greetings and salutations, ladies, menfolk, and non-binary viewers. Welcome to another episode of Game Break, an ongoing series where me and my crew take a break from our creative endeavors and play some video games. I am Charles, coming to you today with another episode of World End Economica. Now, last time round, Yoshi and Lisa and what was the person who doesn't like us? Like Hanako? Haruka? Something with an H. Mainly we were still in the church. Not sure when we're gonna leave the church, or what we're gonna do once we leave the church. Hopefully we leave the church. That would be nice. But let's find out. Do we actually get to leave the church or not? Get the mouse out of the way. Tossed my backpack over my shoulder. Since today was Sunday and the trading houses were closed, it was an important day for me as I could go out and just walk around. It also appeared that the culprit from the theft was arrested, so the odds of being mistakenly arrested and taken home had diminished. It was just as Lisa suspected. The culprit was a young man who also had run away from home. Leaving home without any means, turning to a life of crime and causing trouble for others, this guy was clearly the typical idiot. Alright, I'll give you that one. I'll agree with you on that one. It's possible that he wasn't from Earth, but was born and raised on the moon. As someone born and raised on the moon myself, I could sympathize. But for people from Earth, it seemed that the lower gravity was to blame for making many people lightheaded. Aside from issues of pride, many could live on the collected scraps left over from the geniuses and prodigies of Newton's city who had amassed great fortunes. Some would say that it was the fault of this sense of security, perhaps, compared to the people who came to the moon from Earth. Within the groups of tourists were black and all, but come on, give us something. Anything? No? No? Alright. Even after evading the police, sent to bring me back home, I realized that there was some useful advice to be had, as expected of those seasoned veterans who escaped from the jaws of guerrilla fighters, secret police, and military juntas. I wiped the sweat off with a towel and put on my clothes. The same clothes Lisa and Hagana were complaining about before. After 2 washes, I probably finally got rid of the smell, but I had a feeling that I had washed away something like an important mark of readiness that had been stained into the clothing in the last 3 months. The one thing I had become aware of after leaving home was that people were relaxed by the smell of detergent. The word cleanliness had a rather weak image. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if there's a non-mouse way of moving the words. There's not. Then again, this wasn't half bad. Hey, transition! Back to the room. And the morning music. Yay! I stretched my back and abs. I would do balance training involving headstands and light somersaults, which would go on for no more than 20 minutes. Since I wasn't aiming to be an athlete, any training beyond that wasn't really necessary. If nothing else, the people who came from the town my folks were from, the kind who could never tell a lie, would all say in unison to take care of the body, for it will always be useful. With the height of net prosperity and the lower gravity and the near unlimited supply of electrical power on the moon, physical labor was categorized as being the lowest of the low in terms of recognition. There weren't any people who had made it big with physical labor. At best, there was always the consideration of those who worked in show business. But even then, the ones who got paid the big money weren't the actors who toiled away in their craft, but the people who managed them. However, after leaving home and taking the time to observe things outside of the boundaries of the rules of society, I had come to understand that there was a lot of truth in those words. Are we going to get any background beyond just the black screen at some point? I mean, I know this was a transition point because the screen went black. The moon had low gravity, so it was common to utilize a spring when doing any weight training. A rod and coil made for that purpose had been sold online and was a rather popular product. However, it was questionable how many who bought it actually used it. After all, the fitness company who made a fortune selling sets of rods and coils had managed to sell over 3 million sets, including similar items, but no matter how you looked at it, any single set would have been more than sufficient. How did we get onto exercise stuff? I don't remember that. In fact, the population on the moon was about 700,000 people, although tourists would send that number up to 1 million. There were many people out there who would buy it and not use it, knowing that a new model was on the way. Even if the equipment was used properly, there was the matter of using it for more difficult applications, and then the user manual would neglect to note this. The words of my stubborn, old-fashioned father would repeat in my head while I did weight training, with weights on my arms, shoulders, back,